Good afternoon, everyone, and we're here at Paradigm Studios today with Kara Garland, our COO.
Hi.
Kara, last time we did a podcast, it was all about the culture here at Paradigm. And before COVID, a lot has changed from a business perspective, etc. But most exciting, I think you've taken the opportunity of this time that we had to give even more energy to the Salvation Foundation that you had before. So tell us about the foundation.
Well, yes, I launched in January, and even it being a new organization, I feel that the people's hunger to have more knowledge about child trafficking, sex trafficking, it's really been sparked a lot by the exposure of the rest of what's coming out right now, given the nature of COVID and many different theories, if you will, behind that, and who's behind it, and what all encompasses that. But one of the biggest things that people are realizing is that so much of this could possibly or might very well be going on to cover up the elephant in the room, which is child trafficking. So that being said, the reception that I've gotten from communities and then even people that aren't local, it's spreading like wildfire, and I really feel honored to have so much support behind me and encouragement too from the people that are being turned on to the organization, to my foundation, because all it's doing is propelling me even further and faster, because I have this network of supporters that's starting to spread the awareness by pushing out all the information that I've been sharing. And so much of it is very difficult to not only accept, but then to process once they've accepted that this could very possibly be reality. So my position right now is to continue, of course, on the visions that I have for the foundation as a whole, but honestly it's to start just with the most basic awareness, and so by starting with the awareness and then setting into motion all of the other things that I have going on, I've really sped up the momentum on the foundation and the progress much beyond what I thought in the first few months after launch. So honestly, and this is my passion, and to have this passion that's fueling the foundation, I really feel like we can move mountains, because the people that I'm coming into contact with already have a similar passion for this, and it's for various reasons. There are many different driving factors that really push people toward my foundation, me, the movement, really just the amazing people. And honestly, I'm so excited for what the future holds. This is such a dark, evil, sinister world when you get into trafficking. But then on the other hand, you have so much hope and light and just amazing personalities that are coming out right now. So there's this, and I've mentioned this before in videos that I've done on my social media pages, but the balance, it's very interesting to be, and in many circumstances I remove myself even from my own position in the work that I do, and I have to do that for multiple reasons. I have to be able to look at things from an outsider's perspective. I have to look at things from a 30,000 foot overview, so that I can see the entire scope of work that I'm working on and all of the different facets of the foundation and all the different avenues of approach to eradicating trafficking. But also, I can see that I need to maintain my balance between the dark and the light. So, I have really, really bad days, and then I have really, really good days. And given the nature of the work that I do, I have to have that balance, and I have to maintain as much as I can of staying right in the center of that. So, I have a lot going on, to say the least.
So, if we could address very quickly, and again, the 30,000 foot view, I think for most people, trafficking and children trafficking pretty much is the only contact they have is maybe an Amber Alert on their phone. It's a piece of news on TV, in social media. But we kind of know how media and social media works, and doesn't exactly portray a picture of what things truly are in this world. And you were talking earlier about cover-up, about what COVID could be. So just the 30,000-foot view. What is human trafficking? What is children trafficking? Paint us a picture so that people who are only exposed to it, in terms of seeing it as a piece of news or a quick headline, actually understand the problem and the depth.
The answer to that question can go on and on and on and on. And I think it's unfortunate that child trafficking is not portrayed in reality, because what reality is not a movie such as Taken, where it shows that there's a girl that's abducted and then she's taken to another country and she's sold at a high dollar price in a very what seemed to have been elegant setting. I don't think that's ever reality, at least to my knowledge. It's not. That exact portrayal of it is not even real. So, but of course we're programmed to believe that. So that wasn't that bad. Now, when you look at how horrible and evil and vile it truly is, when you're talking about children that are molested or raped or trafficked by their own family members. And we're not just talking third world countries. Are we talking third world countries? Yes, absolutely. And poverty-stricken countries this is unfortunately a common practice. And a lot of times it's done because parents are trying to survive and they have 5 or 6 kids, but they are unfortunately so poor, they are presented with an option to sell one of their children for, say, $26, and that'll feed the rest of their children and themselves for another month. So yes, that is something that goes on, and it goes on more than anybody could possibly imagine. The numbers, I mean, this will have to be another podcast, but we can give data and statistics about those numbers and what that looks like in different countries. Nepal, for example, is one of the worst in the world. But that's just one scenario. There are other scenarios where you have people in upper middle class, where the parents sell their children, girls and boys, to friends of theirs, or they sell their children so that their children can be used at sex parties. And these are people that live in beautiful homes, mansions, and then they have these sex parties where they all come together, and there's multiple children that are then either chosen by couples or they're chosen by people, and then they act out these sexual acts with them. I mean, and meanwhile they're drinking wine and they're laughing and they're having a great time, like this is just a normal backyard barbecue. So you have those scenarios as well. Then you also have the scenarios where you're dealing with whether it's members that are gang affiliated, or there are pimps, or there are other traffickers working in those different communities of people, and they're being sold. They have sex slaves. They have what people call child prostitutes, even though I don't think that there is ever a child that chooses to be a prostitute. And if that individual does, it's usually because they were groomed to do that, or it's survival sex. So they are selling themselves because they don't see another option for themselves. They are just simply trying to survive. So many different scenarios. The majority of the children that are forced into sex slavery, what is called modern day slavery right now, sex trafficking, are coming from the system. So it's social services, foster care, orphanages. It's so sad to say this, but they are many times just a number. So if this person just happens to go missing, it's easy for those people to get paid a little extra, get paid off on top of, a minimum wage salary. A social worker gets paid an extra 20 grand to make a couple of kids just disappear. The paperwork just goes missing, but they're just a number. They're in the system, and people don't notice when children just go missing. We have, and this is a statistic that was pulled a few years ago, but 800,000 children in the United States that go missing. And those are the ones we know about. So there are so many more that we don't know about. So we're looking into the millions here, honestly. If you're in a position where you know as much as I know, that is a very realistic number. So all these children are going missing. Where are they going? Many traffickers house dozens of children in different locations. So you have a dozen people here that they have somebody handling, a dozen people here, and these are children that are either shipped via vans or buses, or they're housed in other homes. Caretaker scenarios where caretakers are trafficking children. All of this is happening under everybody's nose, and it's gotten to the point where it's hidden in plain sight. And I know a lot of these terms you might be hearing floating around on social media and in the news, but hidden in plain sight describes it very clearly. There are many people in well-respected positions, I'll say that much, that are involved in the business of child trafficking. This is an actual business. There's a business model to this. There's a very high demand for this, and there are very high profits to be made. So right now, and again, the analytics that are done on trafficking in general, I don't believe they are up to date because people don't want them to be up to date. So they're not doing thorough investigation and data analysis into current numbers right now because they don't want people knowing current numbers right now.
Right.
So a lot of the studies that you see were done years ago, and they somehow seem to have just kind of fallen off the face of the planet. There aren't studies that are done that are up to date, and so I believe that the numbers that are being thrown around could easily have doubled or even tripled. The demand for child sexual exploitation material has increased astronomically. Let's just go back a few months from the beginning of COVID, when everybody was in quarantine. I think it increased by 30%, and that number I was given like a month and a half ago.
Correct.
So, and it really comes down to the desensitization of our society. So when you're looking at movies, and when you're looking at things that are being programmed into our children's cartoons and movies, and the things that are just being kind of shoved in front of our faces, you look at big pornography sites that are now pushing material that is material filmed with underage girls, and you don't even know it. But Pornhub, for example, they have, I believe, over 1 million signatures to shut down Pornhub because they knowingly put up child sexual exploitation material. Yes. And I mean, there's girls that have come forward that were 14 years old, raped at 14. It was filmed and it was put on Pornhub, and over 50 different portions of Pornhub had her material in it. So I don't know whether it was rooms or files or different types of categories, had her material in it. So she went on the search for it and saw her rape on Pornhub. So there are many people that are petitioning actively to shut that site down because she is just one of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Yes. So it's everywhere. And then you look at the nature of pornography. If you look back, the history of it, it just keeps getting darker and darker and darker. So when you desensitize, people, decade after decade after decade, they become numb to what used to be normal. So now it's gone from, a healthy practice to, if you could consider it that, but I mean, even sexual activity in general, the nature of it has gotten, in many ways, very dark and twisted. And then you go so far as to include, people don't understand, and I don't, I could easily give you a rundown of the different types of I think it's actually in my other folder, the different types of things that are incorporated into sex trafficking. And, it goes as far as molestation and rape to satanic ritual abuse and mind programming, and then they use trauma-based programming. There's, obviously violence that's incorporated into so much of it, instilling fear, and there's bestiality, there's cannibalism. I mean, so many people are going to be shocked with the mention of some of those. I mean, I have a much more extensive list, but those are just some of the examples of what happens and what takes place with child trafficking. We talk about racism right now. Racism is in child trafficking. There are specific child trafficking rings that I've heard of that have such a diverse group of children, because people come for fetishes or to take out their anger on children of different races sexually. So the stuff that's happening, I mean, a healthy, sound human being mind cannot just think this up. Like you can't make this stuff up. It is so evil. It's evil beyond evil beyond evil. I mean, if you hear the stuff that I've heard and you're exposed to the stories from these survivors, you, without knowing that this is real, with all the research behind all the research that I've done, you would literally start to think that you're going crazy in your own brain. Like this isn't real. This isn't, and it's so easy for so many people to say that and to push that off. We talked about this. We talked about the reasons why people don't want to believe or people want to push off this information, things that are based on their own personal experiences. It's a trigger for a lot of different people. I feel that a lot of people are very fearful of what they're going to learn, what they're going to be exposed to. If I know too much, what's going to happen to me? How is that going to translate into my everyday life? Am I going to start having nightmares about this stuff? A lot of people are just straight up in disbelief, cognitive dissonance. They don't want to believe it, so they will make up their own storyline or their own ulterior story about what it really is like or what it really isn't like, so that they don't have to really accept that this is actually happening or that it could happen to their own children. Another thing that is another factor is people are so empathetic. So we have people that they go, and unfortunately I've had to learn how to really control this, because I tend to do that as well. Not only am I a very visual person, so I picture myself in that scenario as I'm listening to it, but then I empathize with that person. So I feel what they felt, because I can feel their energy as they're telling me the story. So I've had to learn how to really block those energies from me taking them on and feeling that with the empathy. Another thing that I've gotten reached out to quite a bit about is that people want to know and they're eager to learn more about this, but at the same time, then they don't want to know too much because they can't really do anything about it. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't have any tools. I don't have any resources. A lot of people are like, well, I can't donate and I can't volunteer right now because of my own personal circumstances. So as much as I encourage you and support you, and I'm so glad you're speaking out about this, I don't know what to do, so I kind of feel a little lost. And there's much to be said about what they can do. So another podcast for another time, but I'm very willing to share exactly what they can do to feel like they're a part of this, and that they too might be able to have a voice. Like I mentioned with the triggers, past abuses, past relationships, past traumas of their own as children, or even just the emotions that come with all of what I just mentioned. Just the emotions, because there's so much emotion that's evoked when talking about these types of things. But ultimately, hopefully I answered your question thoroughly enough, but there's so much more to sex trafficking than just someone getting abducted. And one other common false belief is that they're all prostitutes. And prostitutes do make up, a percentage of ones that are trafficked, children and minors that are trafficked. But like I mentioned, it's a very small percentage of the people in this big, huge pie chart, if you will, very small percentage of people that are willingly doing prostitution. The rest of what is viewed as prostitution is forced prostitution, forced trafficking. So it's, and a lot of people don't understand the psychology of what these traffickers and predators do to these children. So they instill fear by either being abusive, hurting them, threatening them and their families, or showing them being violent and abusive to other children. So I've experienced stories where all of those are the case. So these women and children, boys and girls alike, another common misconception or false belief is that it's just girls and just women, but that's not reality. Boys are molested and raped. Gosh, I would say it's starting to grow increasingly. I would say it's even 40% to 50% of the children. I mean, that number of boys being sexually abused is growing, and it's always been there. But it's such a taboo subject that boys are raped, because then I mean, the amount of survivors that come forward, it's like 99% are female.
Of course. Because
then the boys are looked at, well, if I was raped, does that make me gay? Or what are people going to think of me if as a boy or as a grown adult, as a man, I come forward and I talk about how I was raped as a child. So there are so many walls that I want to break down with what sex trafficking really is and who's involved and how they're involved. And I really just want to give people the awareness and a clear understanding and a clear picture of what it is. And then with that knowledge, not only will I be sharing more information as it comes to light, but then I feel that it will empower people to then go do their own research, and hopefully as we continue to move forward and more of this information keeps coming to light, they will have more credible and viable resources that they can go to for this information, because that's another part of the problem. One big part of the problem is the corruption, who's involved, who's trying to keep all of this underground, quiet, hidden, and away from the public eye, and being deceptive about what trafficking really is and who all is involved and the scale to which the involvement is. But then if we can provide all of these resources and information, more can be done about it, because more people know and more people are empowered and more people feel like they have something that they can work with now. So that's one of the biggest components to what I'm doing at this current moment, is on the awareness side. So there's a bunch of different approaches that I'm taking on those avenues of the awareness, and then the prevention, and then the rescue, and then the rehabilitation. So it's a lot of information.
I know we talked about that last night, about how we were going to do this first podcast, which is kind of an introduction to a series, right?
Right.
And so one thing that we touched on is people realizing that, as you said, it's not just third world. It's on your doorstep. We live in Temecula. which is next to the second safest city in the US. And yet, there are constant reminders that somebody's trying to snatch children as they come out of schools, as they're playing in the communities, etc. So there were two things that I think we discussed that we really wanted our audience to understand. And one is no one is safe.
No.
Anywhere.
Yep.
That's number one. Number two, and this is really, really important. Kara is getting a lot of comments on her social media about people saying, conspiracy theory, what are you talking about? It doesn't exist. So we kind of thought last night about what do we know that has happened in the past where people have said, oh no, it's just conspiracy theory, and yet it was proven to be true. And we came to the same conclusion, the Holocaust. Remember, we're not even a century away. We're 60 years away from a time when 99% of the population around the world at the time thought it was not true, dismissing it, and yet we found out that millions, we're talking millions of people, were gassed, abused, medically tested on, very much what is happening today. So remember that when you hear stories, when it feels like it's not possible, remember that history has shown us that it is possible. And the world has not gotten better over the last 60 years. It's very much gotten a lot worse in many ways. So remember that. And this is what Kara is telling you. Don't just look at social media and the media and the stories and dismissal, and you see it. Stories here one day, it's gone the next day.
Right.
And if something actually stays a little bit too long, all of a sudden it's a conspiracy theory. Oh, it's ridiculous. And yet remember, please, it has happened in the past and it could happen again. So now I'm going to make it a little more difficult for Kara, because you have not only spoken with survivors in person, we're not talking over the phone, we're not talking about social media, we're talking one-on-one in a room and heard the stories. But also tell us why, for you, this is so important.
Well, that's probably the question that I get asked the most. It's typically after I tell what I'm doing and what the Salvation Foundation is. They ask, well, what led you to do this? And my answer is pretty straightforward. I am, too, a survivor of sexual violence and abuse. I was molested and raped as a child and as an adult. Different circumstances, different scenarios, multiple times throughout my childhood and into my adulthood. So, and they were by people that anyone would look to trust. As a child, it was my best friend's parents, both the mother and the father, which is another point I'd like to make. It is not just a man that's going to abuse you. It's, you know, the way that they orchestrate this, if you look at predators, they prey on individuals. So they're very intelligent many times. They are very strategic. They will identify weaknesses in people. And they will build and establish a level of trust in many cases, especially in those environments where you know your abuser. And in so many circumstances, the ones being abused know their abuser. It is either a family member, or it's a family friend, or it's someone that's just slightly removed, whether it's a teacher or a counselor, or in my case, it was, like I said, my childhood best friend's parents that were both involved. And then it was law enforcement. So there were four police officers in a local law enforcement jurisdiction that were my abusers, and then a doctor that abused me. So I can relate to so many different aspects of what the survivors I've spoken with have been through. So I wasn't trafficked per se, but the abuses and the acts of violence and the act of the abuse triggered the same types of traumas that some of the other different abuses that I listed will trigger. So, and that's another podcast too. What traumas develop because of those abuses, and how deep do those traumas run over certain periods of time, and different age groups will establish different levels and depths of trauma. When you're looking at, and this is going to appall some people, but it's the truth, there are children as young as newborns that are being sexually abused. And I know that it's so much for some people to handle, but that doesn't make it any less true. It is true. There are celebrities that have come out and spoken for foundations like mine, where they've watched material, child sexual exploitation material, that shows infants with the umbilical cord still attached being sexually abused. So you have newborns, you have infants and toddlers and elementary school age children, middle school, high school children that are being abused and trafficked. And so many of the times it's, like I mentioned, grooming, where they're promised love and safekeeping or a job or housing, whatever the case may be. They're groomed to believe something. So number one, they let their guard down. Number two, they get very close to the person that is preying on them. So not only do they show who they are just by conversing with them, but they show their weaknesses. They share their weaknesses. They share the things that scare them in life. They have communication, and all they're doing is exposing themselves, and that allows the predator to prey on them in the precise way that they know how. They just alter their approach based on the person that's in front of them. So, like I mentioned, for many of the children, they're in vulnerable situations and circumstances. So they're threatened, their life is threatened, or they see another child that's being tortured because they didn't listen, or because they wouldn't stop crying, or because they were screaming, or they see other children being tortured because they didn't do what they were told to do by the purchasers that are purchasing them for these sexual acts. So they're terrified. Their families are threatened. Their siblings are threatened. And these predators know this information. So they find this information and they'll use it against them. So they're forced into this place. But then they're also told that if they do go back home and they speak about it, or if they do go to authorities and they speak about it, then either they will be killed or their family will be killed. So, you wouldn't believe how many times the survivor says, well, I'd rather be killed. I would rather them kill me than me suffer one more day. But I don't want my sister to be dragged into this. And he said that he would kidnap my sister and force her to do this.
And
so
then,
they stay.
And that's the part that's shocking, right? You when you were talking about your own experience, you're talking about three types of people who are in positions of authority, and not just a perceived position of authority. A parent, right? Law enforcement, and doctors. I mean, that is the most shocking part of all of this is, how do you go to report to law enforcement if the abuse came from law enforcement to start with?
Well, that's another problem. One of the survivors that I've spoken with as a child, the trafficking ring that she was involved in, the main guy that led it, allowed law enforcement to use the children for free as their payment to remain silent and to turn away from the activities that were happening. Or law enforcement would tip them off to a sting operation that was going to go on, where they were going to show up and bust the trafficking ring. Law enforcement would then give them a tip and let them know so that they wouldn't be caught. So, honestly, the corruption is any person, anywhere, could be a predator. And so many of the times it's people that are involved with children, whether it's Boy Scouts of America, for example, or certain children's organizations. I know UNICEF was another really big one. The founder, I believe it was the founder or the CEO of UNICEF, was then convicted of child abuse or child molestation. Don't quote me on that because I'm not exactly sure of the actual charges that were filed against him, but there were 2 children that were found in his possession. I think they were 13 and 14, just totally going off of memory there. But those are prime examples of people that are in positions of authority that have organizations that cater to children. But if you think about it, and this is what I've had to do too. I've had to take a stand from understanding the psychology and the mindset of a victim or a survivor, but I've also had to remove myself from that mindset, and put myself in the mindset and the psychology of a predator. So I can really understand the full scope of what's going on, so that I understand, yes, I understand a victim's mentality, and I understand a survivor's mentality, and I understand what that looks like. But then understanding a predator and trying to understand, first of all, how did they become a predator? Predators don't just wake up one day and have a desire to abuse children. There are many different reasons why a predator becomes a predator. Typically, predators were abused, severely abused, as children themselves, and it evolved into the monster that they are now. So part of what I've talked about and I've mentioned, with the approach of the awareness, prevention, rescue, rehabilitation, the rehabilitation, of course, that's all for the victims and survivors. But there's another approach that I want to present, and it's going to be, a little bit further down the line, but it's the rehabilitative approach for predators, which is another form of prevention. Because if we can give them the tools, whether they're a pedophile, whether they're a self-classified pedophile and they have an attraction to children, a sexual desire to be with children, as it's coming out now, which I just can't wrap my head around. I just can't agree with the fact that it's just a preference. It's a predator. You're a predator, whether you're a pedophile or whether you're a rapist. You still need rehabilitative help, So I keep saying hurt people, and it's true. So if we can rehabilitate these predators, and as people try and wrap their heads around helping victims and survivors and the atrocities that are taking place, they think I'm crazy when I talk about helping predators.
I was a little shocked by that myself
and
last
abusers.
night. Yes.
But if we can help them before they either hurt children or continue to hurt children, and if we can put them into a place where they have resources where they can be rehabilitated, whether you look at drug addicts or you look at alcoholics, they have resources. They're driven there by either prior abuse. You look at so many drug addicts, they've been abused themselves, whether it was child abuse, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the case may be. So many users, whether it's their outlet is alcohol or substances, you choose it, substance abuse, drugs, or substance abuse, alcohol, or another substance abuse, put that in a classification, they're a predator. All of them have a certain disposition that makes them go to those different things. So if we can cater to drug addicts, if we can cater to alcoholics, we can cater to predators and hopefully turn them to where it's a positive result. Instead of them continuing to go down that road, being imprisoned for a short amount of time, because that's a whole other podcast, is our system is not prosecuting these criminals with enough penalties, and they aren't severe enough to where it's deterring people from doing it. One, the corruption side, but then two, victims and survivors don't want to come forward because they're fearful or terrified that they or their families are going to be hurt or killed. So then trying to prosecute them and put them into jail with or punishments such as executions, like Bard just did with 4 of them.
Yes.
If that were the case, it would deter so many people from doing it. But let's go back to the preventative approach. If we can rehabilitate them to where we can heal those childhood traumas that they suffered too, maybe we can reshape their mind, their psychology, their outlook, their pains, their traumas, and it's then a trauma-based therapy approach where we fix them so that they don't have those feelings anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They then know how to process all of those pains and traumas that they experienced that through their childhood they didn't know how to process.
Right.
All they knew is how to act on them. If we can rewrite it, then maybe, quite possibly, we can help. We can prevent this from continuing to happen. If we can catch it early enough on where now we're catering, this is part of a proposed curriculum for the wellness center that I'm looking to implement.
Mm-hmm.
If these children have been abused, we have to look at it like, one, they need to heal from those pains and those traumas, the PTSD, the different types of disorders that come with that, whether it's suicidal thoughts or different types of tendencies, OCD, self-harm, ADD, insomnia, flashbacks, the list goes on.
Mm-hmm.
We have to heal those. We have to give them healthy, rehabilitative, tangible tools that they can take home with them and utilize as a child, on the holistic modalities approach. There are many different tools that have a very significant impact on a child's wellness and rehabilitation to trauma. So if we can incorporate those holistic modalities and those holistic approaches, and we can give them those tools, that's one set of therapies that we can hand off to them. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the traumas that were done to these children don't trigger negative behaviors then, like child abuse toward other children, as they are starting to now come into what should have been their real sexuality ages, where preteen years is when their hormones start to switch over and they start to go through adolescence and puberty. If we can really get to them before then, or even if they're in that stage, focus on healing them so that those traumas don't trigger them to want to sexually abuse other children at that age, then we might be able to shift the
outcome.
Yes, shift the outcome of them to becoming predators in the future. So there's so much more that I could say about what I've learned and about what is going to be implemented in the foundation. But like you said, this is just one of an entire series that we have that's going to be coming out of podcasts where I'm going to be talking about all of those different topics and more on a much more in-depth level. And we're going to really try and pinpoint one topic per session so that people really get educated, and I also too want to open up for other people that are in this field of work to reach out and see how we can partner together, because I'm the last person that wants to do this on my own.
Right.
I know that there are some amazing organizations that have already had years under their umbrella of work, and they're not just local here to Southern California. They're all over the states. They're doing international work. And I would love to, partner with them so that we can collaborate and really come at this with a very diverse approach as far as, backgrounds and experience and knowledge and maturity, different maturity levels. And I know that there are a lot of people that have organizations. I don't say a lot. There are people that have these organizations that are thriving and really making a really big impact. And I honestly want to know what we can do to where we can assist one another in the different approaches that we're taking. So that's something that I want to put out there as well.
So listen to everything you're saying and looking at it from I'm a very rational, common sense. So what I would love for us to talk at one of the next podcasts is, yes, there are certain predators who are the victims of their own violence, But I want to believe that once you start monetizing on that, it becomes something else. At this point, it's a whole different kind of evil. At this point, you're willing to trade a life in a terrible way, in absolute terrible ways. And we'll cover those terrible ways gradually, because I don't think anybody is ready to hear everything that's going on just like that. It would just be too difficult. The other part, which I think is very important to you, is for victims to come forward, right? You were just talking about being able to help predators, right? But here's the problem. We have a self-fulfilling prophecy and this ever replicating cycle, because now the victim doesn't want to talk, right? If they speak to a therapist is not allowed to talk because of the client or the patient privilege, right? So when does it come out? When do we actually identify we need to help this person? Unless that person comes forward and says something, right? But even more horrendous than that, I think, we were talking last night, there are cases where some victims actually share their experience with therapists, and therapists tell them flat out, I just can't help you.
Yes, so yes, I want to continue to gather this network of amazing, strong warrior individuals, both boys and girls, men and women alike. And I want them to come forward for multiple different reasons, obviously. My main goal, and I hesitated to even share about my ideas to rehabilitate predators, because that's very it's very involved. That approach is very involved, but like I said, that's in the very distant future. So I mean, we're talking a few years out for the wellness center. Right now we're offering these therapies to survivors as we speak. The holistic approach, the different modalities of natural holistic tools that they can utilize for their own therapies, and to feel comfortable more and more over time talking about their stories and sharing them. So that being said, my goal right now, one of the biggest goals, is to continue growing this network of survivors and have these victims and survivors. And I say victims because there are people that can come forward that might use the foundation as a way out. So they want to get out, or they see the light on how they could possibly. So they have to know that this is a safe place for them. They aren't going to be grilled. They aren't going to be questioned. They aren't going to be interrogated. They're going to be in a very calm, warm, welcoming, safe, relaxed environment, a healing environment where they can just come and just breathe. If that's all they need to do, that's what they can do. I just want them to know that there are survivors at every different level, and no two stories are the same. Every single story is different. Did they experience the same traumas? Many times, yes. Many times it's different scenarios, and their experiences were differently implemented on them, or they were put in different scenarios, or they experienced different traumas in different ways. But ultimately, the group of stories that I've heard, they're all in this one funnel of different things that has happened, or that can happen. So the survivors that come, they can share as much information as they want, or they can share as little information as they want. None of their information is ever used. No names are ever disclosed. It might as well be a doctor-patient privacy, because no information is ever shared without their consent.
Right.
And even with that, I'm extremely sensitive. We don't say names. We don't, unless they want their name to be said, because they're at that point in their healing where they want their voice to be heard finally, because they've been silenced for so long. That's the only circumstance to where we would ever even share information, and then it's for the foundation and the foundation alone. But they have an opportunity to sit with other survivors that have been through the same things, and now they don't have to feel so alone or isolated or crazy, because some of these victims were so severely abused for so long that then they start thinking, was this really real? Did I really experience this? Did I really go through those traumas? Or are these just nightmares that I'm having every night? What was real? What wasn't real? And many of the times they're drugged, whether it's different types of drugs or alcohol. They're forced to drink alcohol so that their memories are fuzzy. It shuts off the pain to their bodies. So when they're raped over and over and over again, you know, some of these children are raped 30 times in one night. Just purchaser after purchaser. So, I mean, think about that pain that little child is enduring. They have to drug them to numb that pain and to make those feelings go away so that they can perform and make their money off of them. So a lot of the times they don't even really know what is reality and what wasn't, because their memories are so fuzzy. Or they removed themselves from their body. Their minds completely shut their acknowledgement of what was taking place at the time off. So they only remember portions of it, or they don't even remember it at all. Or all they know is that they woke up and they were there in this room, and there was this man, or there were these men surrounding them, and they don't even know how they got there. Or they knock them out before they do the transport, so they don't know where they went. So there's so much to be said about each one of those experiences that the survivors had, and their stories are so different. Our approach is so different when it comes to talking to them and allowing them to share this stuff. It is completely led by them and their level of comfort. So to have that safe place where they can talk or not talk, that's all that we want to know them to know, is that that is here for them. So as I have survivors that keep coming forward, you know, I know that more are going to feel inclined to come, you know. So there are many ways to reach out to me, whether it's through social media or through my website. But I would definitely invite them all to reach out, and, you know, at whatever level they want. If they just simply want to talk from an undisclosed number via text message, you know, that's one way. I don't need to know anything about you.
Absolutely.
Or if they're comfortable with a phone call, or a FaceTime, or even a Zoom, or, you know, if they do want to come and speak with me in person, they're more than welcome at any level. And I'm happy to introduce them to other survivors over the phone too, if they just need to talk to somebody. Just for that acceptance that they're not alone, or that someone else has experienced similar things.
And it goes beyond that, right? Because if you really break it down, it's actually the precursor to assisting predators. Because what you're doing is, if you can start talking to survivors as they're coming out of it, you can address all the potential pitfalls and the issues that may lead some of them to become predators. So It really is the entry, and maybe even the end for many of them, the good end, to never having to go down the path of becoming a predator themselves, because it is caught right there, and they can share the stories with other people.
Yes.
Right?
And a lot has to be said, especially for the boys that have been abused. I wish that I can make that less uncomfortable for them, because the way I look at someone, it doesn't matter what gender you are, or what nationality you are, or where you come from, or anything about anything. All that matters is that you're a human being that was broken down and abused, and you're hurting. And guys, girls, men, women, boys, girls, whatever, I wish that they could find that strength to just be open about it. So one, they can heal from that, because these, even for adults that are dealing with these hidden traumas, you don't even realize, or maybe you do, but the fears that were instilled in you so many years ago are literally shaping the way that you live your life every single day, every minute of the day. The fears, the anxieties, the triggers, all of that is put together to shape you into the individual that you are right now. So there are so many different things that I could list that are a direct reflection of those traumas. Even if you don't remember them, they're there. So let's just have an open conversation about what you're experiencing and what you know happened to you as a child, or what you think might have happened to you as a child. Let's just openly talk about that. And so one of the things that we're going to pull together at our volunteer meeting next month is I'm going to share in depth all of the different things that I have going on in each of those avenues: awareness, prevention, rescue, rehabilitation. And then I'm going to share everything and divulge all of the things that are being worked on so that I can then call on people that want to volunteer their time, because I have had an abundance of people that want to volunteer and help in some way, some form. So I will share, and there's things from working with children, to therapists, to psychologists, to people that work in government agencies and that know legal. And I have to pull on you guys for advice and information. And if we could come together as a community and all work together, and we can then reach out to our networks beyond just what we have, we can really create a very big movement into each of those avenues and really get the wheels turning so that we can tailor our approach and do it with preciseness and do it with serious momentum. And so if I can get people working in all the different areas that I need additional support, because I do at this point, I didn't do what I was told, and I didn't just go down one lane. I didn't just choose, okay, I'm going to go on the awareness side, or I'm going to go on the rehabilitation side. I chose it all because I think that all of it needs to be addressed. So if we can do this, and I have that team of people that's willing to put in the time and the work, we can fast track this in so many ways. So it's too much to say now, which is why I'm having the volunteer meeting. It's going to be on July 14th, and I have information that's going to be sent out, that's going to be emailed out. So if you're looking to attend, then you can sign up on my website, and you'll be emailed more information about the volunteer meeting and how you might possibly be able to assist. And you don't have to be local. We're going to do a Zoom as well. So it'll be a live Zoom that you can log into, and you'll be able to listen to everything that I'm sharing with the volunteers that are in the meeting. But I have people that are in countless different states, and I even have people that are not in the States. I have people that are international that want to somehow contribute. So I just know that if I share enough of what I have going on, people are going to have light bulbs that turn on, and things are just going to start clicking. And people where they might not have thought that they would be useful are going to say, hey, I know somebody that can help with that, or I know somebody that can take care of this thing that she needs to have done, whether it's for any of those avenues. And I really just think that collaboratively, my group of supporters and volunteers will be able to come together, and we'll be able to move mountains. So I'm really looking forward to that meeting, and I'm really thankful that we sat down today and were able to kind of touch on everything thus far. And I'm really looking forward to this series of podcasts so that we can just continue the education part of things and share what we're doing with each one of those different avenues in the foundation, and really just expand on a lot of the things that I've mentioned already with the different types of abuses and everything that's really encompassed under that umbrella of sex trafficking. There's so many different things that are under it. So
I think when we spoke last night, we kind of identified the things that we want to make clear at the end of every single podcast, right? One, it happens everywhere.
Right.
And in this case, it is most certainly a case where it's okay to be overly worried and careful,
Right.
rather than thinking it's not happening here.
Right.
I think the second one is talk to your children. You may think that they're teenagers and they're just being grumpy because they're teenagers. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's a reflection of something that's happened, and because as we've discussed, they're unable to talk about it, so we press a little harder. And it's okay, even if it is because they're being grumpy, and they'll walk away from the table, but in case it is something else. And I think the third is, if we've witnessed something and you've been quiet because you don't want people to think that you're crazy, or because you don't want to be the person, etc., say something.
Well,
It saves lives, literally.
and to each one of those points that you made, one of the things that I would really love to do, and it's on my list of things to do on the awareness side, is to create material and curriculum to be able to give to many different people. One is parents, and then the breakdown of different age categories of how to address sex trafficking with different children of different age groups.
Sure.
Because as much as you don't want to have these conversations as a parent, and I have 3 kids, so I get it, you have to. If they don't know that those dangers lurk, they won't know how to protect themselves. So we as parents have to give our children the tools, regardless of how uncomfortable it is for us. We have to properly equip our children to be prepared in those different scenarios if something were to happen. And I have had those very uncomfortable discussions with my children at an early age, because I've known about this for so many years, and just in general. But I'm looking to roll out curriculum for parents, for nurses, for doctors, for law enforcement, for churches, for teachers, on how to identify if these things are happening. So not just, I think it's up to parents to have those discussions with your children, but on all of the other things that I mentioned, training hasn't been rolled out in many cases for people to even know what to look for when they are face-to-face with a victim or face-to-face with a survivor. So I would really love to be able to provide that information. And again, that's a lot of work that will go into that, but that is going to happen, where I'm going to have this to where people know how to address a boy that's 7 years old about asking certain questions, identifying questions. Has this happened? Kids act out for a reason.
Yes.
There's always an underlying reason as to why your child's acting out, unless you're dealing with a toddler like I am. Then it's just because he's 3.
And he's pushing his limits.
He is testing. Boy, he is. And and then to your other point, say something. If you even suspect it, I can't tell you how many, if you've been watching my videos and my posts on social media, you know that I'm talking about people that are coming to me with cases of sexual molestation, or they already have cases that are in the system that are not being addressed properly by the courts, and they are looking to me for extra help and guidance and support. Or their teenage daughter was just groomed and they picked up on it and they want to know what to do from there. So, even if you are witnessing something that's going on that might seem like trafficking, and when I roll out the material of what trafficking looks like, I mean, you can really Google it on many different websites, and that information is going to be on my website too, because we are adding more information daily to the website. But Google the signs of what it looks like when someone's being groomed or someone's being trafficked, and you'll start to pick up on certain things, and you'll start to become more aware. And if I could stress anything, it's that we need to teach our children to be aware of their surroundings. And you have no idea how smart some of these children are, and they are just completely, purely innocent, and they make innocent mistakes because their minds don't work that way. And not that we have to descriptively share the details of what a sex trafficking scenario is going to look like, but you can definitely give them points and tips to protect themselves. And if you do see something that's going on, or you suspect that something's going on, or you see crazy things going on at a neighbor's house, or something just doesn't feel right about that person at work, it's best that you say something and have it looked into. Even if you think that you're crazy, it's better to have a professional assess the situation and confirm or deny that that's either happening or not happening, because it could save a life. It could save the life and the purity of a child. And to me, that's worth it. So,
absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I was going to say looking forward to the next one. I'm not sure that's the right expression. But
I don't know. I look forward to it, because honestly, the more I can share with people, the more good I think we can do.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's a hard thing to look forward to talking about, but I look forward to talking with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, please check the comment box. We'll have multiple ways to get in touch with Kara, and multiple ways you can help with human trafficking and children trafficking and sex trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.